some questions about Borer. So let's start at the top, and then we're going to do like a smidge on Chanukah, if I find my sheet, which was here. And then after Chanukah, we're going to actually get to our regular text. Okay, so, and I have, oh yeah, we can do it as well. So we have a lot to cover today. Alan, do you want to start at the top on our blue sheet called Borer?
Definition: removal of undesirable from desirable from a mixture of types. In a Talmudic sense, usually refers exclusively to the separation of debris from grain, that is, to any separation of intermixed materials which renders edible that which was inedible. Thus, filtering undrinkable water to make it drinkable falls under this category, as does picking small bones from fish. The filter fish is one solution to the problem.
So one doesn't actually have to worry about, doesn't have to worry about.
Thank you.
Water? Water?
Okay. Thank you.
So gefilte fish is one way around the malacha of having to pick bones from fish, right? Because if we're eating fish on Shabbos, we have a restriction with regard to removing the undesirable from the desirable, there's an issue about the bones in fish. So gefilte fish is one way to get around this issue of borer.
Oh. But that's only good in Ashkenazi.
Is that why gefilte fish is such a popular?
I think that would certainly be one reason. The other reason is it was inexpensive. So a number of kinds of fish could be brought together and sort of, created into a single. And so my guess is it was probably an economic situation, which was the impetus behind it. However, it also serves very nicely to avoid this issue of borer.
General introduction. After threshing, a mixed collection of waste matter remained on the threshing floor, together with the grain kernels. Included in this combination would be small pebbles of similar degree. These pebbles could not be separated by winnowing because they were too heavy to be carried by the wind. The pebbles and debris were therefore sorted and removed by hand. The process is the milacha of borer.
Okay, so that was in the Talmudic sense when they were looking at this issue. Usually it had to do with getting the debris out of grains. So if it was dirt or little grains, little rocks, normally they would kind of toss things up and have sort of a lattice kind of work to let the grain go through, and the sticks and that other kinds of things would be separated. In this particular case, they couldn't do it by winnowing, so they had to do it by hand. Monica, if you want to pick up the next little section there, starting with definition.
Definition. Any form of selecting from or sort of an assorted mixture of combination can be borer. This includes removing undesired objects or matter from a mixture or combination. Borer with mixed foods. Even though the classic form of borer, as performed in Mishkan, involved the removal of pebbles and similar waste matter from the grain produce, borer is no means limited to the removal of useless matter from food. In fact, any selective removal from a mixture can indeed be borer, even if the mixture contains an assortment of foods. The criteria are types and desire, not intrinsic value. Therefore, removing any food or item from mixed or different types of foods simply because he does not desire the item at that time is considered borer.
Okay, so this is removing undesirable from desirable. So there's an argument that could be made that if I love Brazil nuts and I'm picking out the ones that I love, okay, maybe that's removing the desirable from the undesirable, not the reverse.
And this is kind of what we talked about last week.
This is an extension and a little more detail with regard to that. Mike, you pick it up the next.
Peeling fruits. There's examples of permissible and prohibited types of borer. Peeling fruits. Peeling fruit is permissible with the understanding that the fruit is eaten right away. Sorting silver. Sorting silver is permitted when the sorter intends to eat a Shabbat meal immediately. Alternatively, if the sorter intends to set up a meal for a later point, it is prohibited.
Okay, so silverware, sometimes if you're going to use something immediately, It's different than having it used later. And then number 3 there,
Removing items from the mixture if desired. If the desired item is being removed from a mix, then it is permissible. If the non-desired item is being removed, the person removing it has committed a serious transgression according to the laws of Shabbat.
okay, so it's one of the 39 malachot, and Diane, if you'd like back up under the 3 conditions of borer, we missed that section. Sorting or selecting is permitted.
When 3 conditions are fulfilled simultaneously, it is absolutely imperative that all 3 conditions be present at the time of the borer. By yad, by hand, the selection must be done by hand and not a utensil that aids in the selection. Ochel metok b'solet, good from the bad. The desired objects must be selected from the undesired and not the reverse. Miyad, immediate use. The selection must be done immediately before the time of use and not for later use. There is no precise amount of time indicated by the concept of immediate use, miyad. The criteria used to define immediate use relate to the circumstances. For instance, if a particular individual prepares food for a meal rather slowly, that individual may allow a more liberal amount of time in which to do so without having transgressed borer.
Borer. Okay, so any questions with regard to this? Charles, did you have it?
This made me think about when you study these kind of things, and there's all these different details and stuff like that. And I was just thinking that I think that a reason for all of this is because just like when soldiers, they train for war, so they try to make it as realistic as possible. They try to get that frame of mind. They try to imagine it, all these type of things. So when you start, at least when I look at I realize, geez, I'm selfish, and I start realizing all the implications of that, all the different ways, and it's like all these little implications. So this here, kind of like, well, who cares about this grain? It doesn't apply anymore. But thinking in this manner and talking about things in this manner is like a training for like what we're really supposed to be doing and what this is really supposed to get us to. And then there's that
In terms of conceptual framework, I'll concur with you. I think that there's some value in learning how to think with regard to these issues, whether or not one actually, uses or does this as a practice or not. The fact that we study them, I think, is a valuable tool just in and of itself. So
that's what I agree with you. That's what I'm saying.
okay, so this is like just an extension of borer that we talked about last week. Any other questions or thoughts on the topic? Otherwise, we're going to move on to Chanukah. Okay, so what day are we on?
7,
Okay, and how many days are there?
8.
And what do we know about Hanukkah?
Well, it's the miracle of the oil, to be brief.
Wait,
Alright.
was it the Greeks or the Romans?
Agreed.
The Greeks.
Okay.
I've also heard that it's a makeup Sukkot.
A-
A makeup Sukkot.
A makeup Sukkot. So like if you didn't do Sukkot, you get to do it now?
My rabbi in Claremont said that there's an interpretation that when the Maccabees were fighting the Greeks, when they were down in the caves, they couldn't build Sukkah. So they were Sukkot. So Hanukkah's 8 days as well. So they did. So it's like a makeup. They're not being able to do Sukkot. I guess that's.
So we light candles instead of building sukkahs?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that's related.
Okay, all right. So we've got another 8-day holiday. What other rabbinic holiday do we have besides this one, Hanukkah? It's a rabbinic holiday. What is another rabbinic holiday? The rabbis decided, and it became. Actually, no.
Sukkot is an 8-day holiday.
Nice, but that's in Torah.
Okay.
Okay.
Narrowing them down.
Not
Coming
to
up
be
in the spring.
Shabbat.
No, coming up in the spring.
Oh, is it?
Purim.
Oh, it's Purim?
Purim. Purim is another rabbinic holiday
Mhm.
of rabbinic creation. Okay, so
They got the kind of stuff on one number though, didn't they?
8, is that it? And what is the relevance of 8?
And that how long the oil lasted?
Okay, and generally, what do we think of 8?
It's one more than 7. Okay.
Good, and what does that mean to us?
It's starting the new, like
And actually what's fun about that is 7 is often,
Complete.
in terms of nature, and 8 is going beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So, what were you gonna say, Ellen?
I know you wrote it.
I did. So 8. So Chanukah. They rested on the Hanu. So if we look at this as two different words. What number is this? Huh?
Which,
How many? Anybody? How about a hay?
5.
5. They rested on the 25th of Kislev. Okay, so that's one. There's another Chet Neavot. What are theirs? Neavot.
Candle.
Good. So 8 candles.
Candelina.
So we've got the first letter, the second letter. The halakha, which means,
8 laws.
okay, the law. The veit, which is bait, bite, according to the house of Hillel. So, do you remember when we had the discussion about the candles and Shammai and Hillel? What was Hillel's position?
The lights should increase.
Right. So, and the people who opposed Hillel was the house of Shammai, and Shammai's position was?
You start at 8 and count down.
Okay, and why is Shammai's position a reasonable position to take?
Oil dwindled?
The oil actually dwindled. So their position was, this is exactly what happened. We had oil and then it got, smaller and smaller amounts. So maybe we should do it that way. But we know who won the argument and who often wins the arguments. It's Hillel.
Yeah, but he wins about 98% of the arguments.
Okay, so what else do we know about Hanukkah?
Light and darkness.
Light and darkness, often around solstice there. The darkest night is the night of the new moon, which would be the 6th night.
Yeah, but that's a pretend story of Hanukkah.
The pretend story. Okay, so what's the real story of Hanukkah?
Well, the real story was the Civil War.
Okay, so this is the academic position with regard to what happened at Hanukkah time.
Right, because we don't want to talk about Jews killing Jews.
Okay, so who was fighting whom?
You had the Hasmoneans were fighting everybody else because it moved away from the tradition. They were picking up the Hellenistic traditions.
They were assimilating.
Right, so the assimilated group was actually, according to the academic version, was being supported by Antiochus, and Antiochus said, yeah, you guys can't practice your religion, and, no circumcision. Temple to Zeus was created, and
Isn't that when he
pigs were
wanted them to
slaughtered.
eat pigs? Yeah.
Pigs were slaughtered in the temple.
Mhm.
That's at least according to one version of the story. But how old is this story anyway?
It depends who you read, because it's
Okay, generally speaking.
because it's made up of numerous, things that took place in history.
Okay, so the Seleucids were usually very kind to the people, at least in terms of practicing their own religion. But in this particular case, Antiochus said no, and he favored the Hellenizers. So, at least according to the academic.
I've never heard of this.
The academic version? Okay.
So apparently there's a book of the Hasmonean, which
There actually is Megillat Hasmonean, right, or Antiochus, it depends
which
on
I
how
guess
you
was not
pronounce it.
canonized into the Tanakh. So I've never read it because it's not in any of the Bibles I bought. So where would you find that?
My guess is you could probably look online specifically for Megillat, and it goes by several different names. Megillat Antiochus, Megillat Hasmonean, and then I think there's a couple of other names. I'm assuming it's been translated because it was Hebrew Aramaic.
And
Do you guys need us to move just a little bit further so
Another,
that you
another
can
couple inches.
look just a couple more inches?
You
Okay,
may have a
so
better shot of finding it in a Christian Bible with it has the
It's in the Christian Bible?
apocrypha in it.
A Catholic
You have to get
The Catholics have this?
specific.
Okay, so there's,
Because I've read some of those books from the Apocrypha. I don't
the
know.
Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha are outside canon, and there's like a whole group, although this is kind of more unique. And typically, we're looking at dates that are dating back to like, let's see, 165 BCE. It's not mentioned in Mishnah, it's only mentioned in Gemara, and we've read the Gemara with regard to it. Mahavukah, which is, and very old. What else with regard to the holiday?
Why, I mean, isn't that significant that it's not mentioned in Mishnah?
Of course.
I mean, Mishnah was
There's
200 years
discussion.
after that, which is only, 10 generations after that.
Agreed. There's discussion about why wasn't it mentioned and why is it mentioned in Gemara instead. And some of, at least one theory is because at the time the Mishnah was being codified, they're just getting over the Bar Kokhba revolt. And maybe this isn't a good story to put in because the people who were like watching over might not approve of Jews having revolted against. So that's at least one story as to why it's not in Mishnah but is in Gemara. Okay, anything else? What else do we know? Hanukkah.
We light candles, we play dreidel.
We play dreidel,
And
okay?
And dreidel is very important.
Dreidel is very important. So what are the letters on the dreidel?
Hey.
Gimel,
Shin.
Shin.
Or if you're in Israel,
Hey,
Oh, I should have gotten
oh, that's right. So in Israel, there's instead of a shin, it's
you
a
have a
po.
pay.
So what does this stand for?
A
Great miracle happened there, or a great miracle happened here. Right?
Depends
So
if-
if you're in Israel, it's po. Nes gadol haya sham there, or nes gadol haya po. Okay, so
Is there the same equivalency on the dreidel for the po and the shin?
that's a good question. I don't know. I've never played dreidel in Israel. I'm
No,
assuming that
there's
it
no-
must be.
There's
But-
no difference, it's just the letters, you have a difference.
Nisht or nim. There's different ways of playing. Gans. Oops, what do you say? Gans. Or gib. Hab. And either. So, yeah, so. Sorry, my writing isn't the best here. So, nisht is nothing, or nim, so you would put in, right? Gans, you get the whole pot, or you gib, so you put one in. You either get the whole pot, or you have to put one in. Half, which is the same on either side. Still means actually you kind of like lose a turn, or you don't like gain anything by it. And then shtel would be another one where you would have to put in shtel. Okay, so anything else? Oh, I know. According to Hasidic tradition, when is the last day? Okay, so we have like Yom Kippur is like the day when everything is sealed, right? You're sealed for the year, right?
Right.
But then we have this next holiday, kind of, sort of, which is but then it's really sealed, which is
Simchat Torah.
actually it's Hoshana Rabbah. Comes near the same time, Hoshana Rabbah. And so when is really, really, really the last day?
Hanukkah.
The 8th day. Okay, Zot Chanukah. So
Oh.
yeah, so really, 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 the 8th day is when really, really. Okay. Okay.
Maybe.
What's the esoteric meaning of Hanukkah that if we were to ask? I can't remember what I got on that. That could go
Like light
into
to
a long.
darkness?
No, it goes a lot deeper than that.
Okay,
Well,
so.
if you ask my neighbors that holiday.
Well, I got sent an article on it, information on it, and I can't remember what I read 2 years ago.
All right, so the 8th day, and some people actually do say Gomar Chatima Tova, so
Did Jews really give each other Christmas presents for Hanukkah?
Not normally.
Yeah, I didn't.
Wait for porn.
I didn't.
Porn's
Everybody
getting
asks me
over.
that kind of stuff. Do you really see?
Kids usually get
It
presents.
wasn't of any interest to me. I don't
Kids
know.
usually get
I usually
presents.
do this.
It's within the family though. It's
Yeah,
not
it depends on the family. Some
Very-
families do.
very minor. Like I gave my wife a shirt.
Nice. Oh, that's right. And it is a Hanukkah shirt, no less.
But wouldn't we
She gave me
consider that
socks.
Americanized? So if we went to Israel, would there
We don't
be
really
any,
do
I don't know.
It's not a major holiday, it's a minor holiday.
right,
Yeah.
right, but
Although,
Judy,
you know, I actually read another piece on that, which indicated that,
depends upon, because Judy in Russia said it was major in her family. Yeah, in her family.
For some people, and especially now, it's an emerging holiday, which is one blog that I read, which I thought was quite clever. An emerging holiday.
Emerging holiday in the West.
Because they
Because-
want to, Israel is
Yeah.
trying to mimic America in terms of like excessive consumption.
Oh, sorry
Shopping.
about that.
I mean, the whole experience of going to the mall.
Oh, yes.
They're trying to perfect that.
Wow.
Yeah, of course, that may be true, but they don't mimic us in terms of ordaining women as rabbis.
Actually, there are
Yeah, they
14
do.
reformed women
Yeah,
rabbis
reformed,
in
yeah.
Israel.
But not conservative.
That came to visit my colleges. Yeah,
You
but
go-
she was,
You go to Claremont College?
Mhm.
Who's your rabbi?
Devine Whitman.
Now that
I used to
Mimi
go to services every once in a
Figelsson,
while.
Feigl,
Wilson,
now she's an Orthodox rabbi, isn't she?
yes,
So-
Maybe Orthodox can be female rabbi.
because there are a few.
And she's in America, that's not in Israel, but she's
Actually-
Orthodox.
I'm thinking she's in Jerusalem. She spends a lot
Really?
of time in LA, New York, etc. And she actually taught one class that I had at Academy for Jewish Religion. Very learned. She was a like a Chassid of Rav Shlomo Karlabach.
Right, right.
Okay, so what's different with Hanukkah with regard to our liturgy?
Good question.
Do we do Tachanun? What is Tachanun anymore?
That's Talmud, isn't it?
Tachanun? Okay, good, yeah. It's the practice
Oh,
in the
right.
morning of sort of, all of these things and then some we've done, right? So Tachanun is not done, sort of like confessional sort of thing. What about Hallel, which is what?
Oh, it's praise.
Praise, right. So there's a section in our liturgy which is praise, often psalms, and that is typically added during Hanukkah. And then there's one more thing that we do specifically to Hanukkah. Let's look at page 176.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you for that. Al-Nisi. What's that?
It's my favorite Jewish word, Yiguha. Like absurd or ridiculous.
Okay.
That's what it means. I learned it from the root. I learned from a Hebrew instructor. Like, I know it's a real word.
176. What prayer are we on there?
The bottom.
Okay, what's the name of the prayer?
Hoda'ah.
Hoda'ah. Okay, and the Hoda'ah and Hoda'ah means? Hoda'ah. How do we know it's the Hoda'ah prayer anyway?
Well, it's marked.
Okay, where's it marked?
Yeah, up in the top.
Up at the top where?
It says on the right-hand side, like an index table of contents.
Okay, so the
Hoda'ah.
index table has on the very right-hand margin Hoda'ah, and if you can't do the Ivrit,
Then we
you
would
can
look
at
in
the
the
very
prayer.
left-hand side. In English, it's transliterated, Hoda'ah. So that's the one that is marked. Hoda'ah means
There's all part of the Ashrei. All these
Oh.
sections of the Ashrei.
Ashrei,
Not the Ashrei, the Amidah.
Amidah, correct, yes. Good, okay, so and Hoda'ah means? How about Hodu? Hoda'ah. Hodu means turkey, and it also means thanks. Yom Hodu. All right, so Modim Anachnu Lach is how it starts. Modim Anachnu Lach. And so this is our piece of our prayer, piece of our liturgy within the Amidah, where we're giving thanks. And if you look in the middle of the page in italics, it says what?
On Hanukkah, don't forget the part on
Page 556, so let's look at page 556. And Alex, I think you were up reading next, if you could read the English on al-Hanisi.
556.
Thank you.
Oh, we thank you for the miracles, for the redemption, for the mighty deeds and saving acts brought about by you, and for the wars which you waged for our ancestors in the days of old at this season.
Okay, and then continue on the bottom there.
In the days of the Hasmoneans, Matthias and Yochanan, the high priest and his children,
Or Matisyahu,
oh yeah.
yeah?
Mm-hmm. When the evil government of Greece rose up against your people Israel, to make them forget your Torah and to make them leave the laws of your will. In your great mercy, you rose up from them in the time.
With them.
You rose up with them in their time of trouble and fought in their fight, judged their cause just. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the unclean into the hands of the pure, the evil into the hands of the righteous, and the arrogant into the hands of those who engage in your Torah. For you made a great and holy name in your world, and for your people Israel, you brought about the great triumph and redemption on that very day. And when your children came to the Holy of Holies and emptied your temple, and purified your holy place, and lit candles in your holy courts, and established these 8 days of Chanukah, grateful to acknowledge and to praise your great name.
Okay, and what a wonderful day to thank for miracles, redemption, mighty deeds, and also a successful Beit Din for Monica Sullivan. Moriah Bat Abraham Basara.
Yay, Mazel Tov.
The Beit Din was this morning.
Oh.
The mikvah's tomorrow.
Great. So there's also a paragraph in the graph of,
Yes, we also add al-Hanisi in Birkat HaMazon. It should be, yes, is the answer, and I'm not sure if we have it in the,
what is that?
if you're looking for a bencher, it's very front room. There should be some tucked up in on the left bookcase near the, okay, go.
Is
So-
the Kohanim part of the Levites? They're just different, it's one big thing, or?
There's three groups of tribes, I should say. The Kohen, the Levi, and Yisrael. So Yisrael is the everybody else.
Okay, because I read this thing about, it was about Hanukkah, and it was about the Levites, and it was talking about what they did, and then it was also talking about the Kohanim, but I didn't know if the Kohanim came out of the Levites, or if they were completely different. Are there different tribes then, or what?
They're not allowed to drink.
They did have some problems early, yes.
Yeah, they're not allowed to drink. If they know that they're going to serve
In the
the
temple.
temple, they're not allowed to drink.
But the Levites actually started fighting. What I read was from some Chabad thing, but it said that the Levites at first, they were like praying and they were, basically like trying to help out the people in that way. But then when it came down to it, that they went out to war and they were talking about how even when they went to war, they were praying and they were all serious about it, and like those things in the Torah about cleanliness and all of that kind of stuff.
Right, before battle and all of that, right.
So,
Yes, yeah.
So on the
So for the venture,
In
for
the venture-
Hanukkah,
the
it
venture,
says
you do have the full
al-Hanisi.
And even on the shortened version, there is a shortened.
Be sure. Go ahead, read it. Go ahead.
It's may the merciful grant us the miracle of deliverance as he did for our ancestors in the days of Matthias and his sons. So even on the shortened version, you don't omit it entirely, you summarize it. I think that's interesting. That's significant. So you might say it's sort of a matter of levels, because the Jews of that period were influenced by the Greeks, by the Hellenistic period, to some extent. And then at some point, you said, "Stop! We've gone too far." And maybe that was what happened. Because I was really surprised by the art in the 3rd century synagogue in 1500 that they reveal the mosaics.
Yeah.
And the mosaics had a lot of Greek influence. Like they literally had mosaics of Greek gods on the floor of the synagogue, right?
Helios,
So it's like, well. it's-
Hellenistic
Do you
Jews.
ever think that
arguably.
is Jews?
It's just, you know, it's just art. It's just, you know, it's just a mosaic pattern. It had nothing to do with those objects as icons, religious icons. It was simply
Art.
It was simply, you know, a high
Considered
finish.
decorative beauty.
Right, it was
And
a
it
high
may have
finish
been,
for the
you know,
synagogue floor.
Greek artists doing it,
Right.
potentially.
I was just wondering if, because this seems similar in Jewish history, so I was just wondering, like, because Jews try to basically be cool with the people around them. So maybe that's why this kind of thing happens, because it's
I
just
think
like,
that was Alan's
is that what you were
remark.
saying?
Yeah, kind of
Okay,
thing,
well,
yeah.
I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be, and then at one point it comes to be like too much. Okay, so it was Matisyahu, what were the name of his 5 sons? Oh, this is a test.
Oh, boy.
Huh? You should know the name of one.
Parsons.
Who?
What name is most dear to you? Perhaps.
Your
Hello.
No, the Who was not the right singing group.
What is it? Yehuda?
Maria.
That's one. Let's see, Yonatan, Yochanan, Shimon, and Eliezer. Those were like the Maccabees. So Yochanan, Shimon, Eliezer, Yonatan, and Judah, and Matisyahu. Who led
Now
his
wait,
5
you're looking
sons.
at your sheet.
I am, of course, looking at my sheet. I didn't have my sheet. I'm
Where's-
so
where's
excited. I remember
ours?
Wait a minute.
Judah.
Let me explain something. Teacher, student. Teachers are
Thank you,
allowed to
Mike.
look at their sheets.
So now
Goodness.
Thank you, Mike.
It became a kingdom, right? A line of a lineage. of
Right, the
kings.
Hasmoneans, right.
So who were the kings of those sons? Only one of them served as king, right?
I wouldn't say that they served as kings. They were back in the temple. They were the ones who were doing temple service.
Mhm.
So I'm not thinking that they were set up in a monarchy at that point. But then again, you know, somebody who knows more history about this may be better equipped to track that.
Is Mel Gibson really making a movie about the Maccabees?
I don't know.
I don't think it's out
yet.
Well, I heard that's like Mel Gibson made all these anti-Semitic remarks, and now
He was drunk and he made them, that's definite.
If he was drunk.
Anyway.
In
I think-
Hollywood.
I think
Yeah,
we're
he was,
digressing.
It was a cop that
I'm
pulled him
pretty
over
sure
and
we're
that's when he said it.
digressing onto
I
something
don't use
that we
that's not
probably
excuse.
don't really need to talk about today. So let's move back into our book. We started on Mishnah. Mishnah lists the 39 malachot, forbidden on Shabbat, broad categories, and then we were talking about something more specific, and we got to 119. I think you want to take that up there.
That's what they were.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to really cut you guys off. I just think, you know.
Yeah, you did. You want to get us redirected back on track.
Well, it's not.
Well, I prefer not to have like, you know, I prefer to have Shmirat HaRashim. So, Rabbi Yossi, which is in the italics, which is where we start. Oh, and let's back up for maybe people who were not here. One of the most famous sayings within Tractate Shabbat, within all of Talmud, is at the very top of the page of 119.
If only Israel were to keep 2 Sabbaths properly, they would be redeemed forthwith. As it is said, as for the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, and then I will bring them to my sacred mount. Isaiah 56:4.
Okay, so if Israel keeps 2 Shabbats, then comes redemption. That's the argument, right? Okay, so where actually did we leave off? Who was the last
Right
person to
there.
read?
Right there, Rabbi Yossi said.
Who was the last person to read?
Alex.
Okay, so, Rabbi
Rabbi
Yossi.
Yossi said, "May my portion fall among those who enjoy 3 meals on the Sabbath."
Okay, so 3 meals were a uniqueness for that time period. We eat 3 meals a day and we think nothing about it, but for them it was kind of special. So,
Rabbi Yossi's saying opens a collection which the
redactors, editors.
Talmud inserted here, even though the few sayings, even though few of the sayings have any bearing on the Sabbath, eventually the Gemara returns to the theme of the Sabbath delight. Several of the antidotes should be read against the backdrop of a highly satisfied society.
Highly stratified.
Oh, stratified.
And stratified means that there's certain layers of wealth, that some of them are going to be more rich and some are going to be like really dirt poor.
So it was a caste society, right?
Well, caste would actually imply that that was part of the law, and stratified, I think, means that it's more indigenous, that kind of, like,
Oh, it just happened.
developed that way.
Alright. Society in which men did not think it dignified to engage in menial tasks, such things could normally be left to women or servants. But to honor the Sabbath was a personal privilege to be pursued eagerly.
And I think that's an important piece. There's certain, when we try to read Talmud, it's very hard for us to grasp the concept of the society in which it was drafted, written, edited, and lived. So people who engaged in menial tasks were beneath. There's certain codes and rules that are written. Rabbis shouldn't do A, B, and C. Okay, picking up stuff from the bottom of a bathroom floor, for example, right? Because it was considered a menial task.
Are you talking about Orthodox Judaism?
I'm talking about the time when this was actually written.
Where you had Benjamin Netanyahu today had to tell the police that they have to be aggressive in protecting women in public areas. Not if they can be screaming bloody murder from their home, but they can't be protected there.
Well, there's a lot going on there these days. So, at any rate, Rabbi Hanina?
Rabbi Hanina would robe himself on the eve of the Sabbath and stand and proclaim, "Come, let us go forth to welcome Queen Sabbath."
Okay, and we learned right before we started Talmud that there's a difference between Ata and At. So, if we were calling the Queen Shabbat, we would say Ivrit. Yes, but
I find it
how would we say come?
Bavi,
Bowie.
Bowie,
And if we were calling Rabbi Hanina, we would say
Ba,
Bo.
Bo.
But yet, on the other hand, what you're talking about is in the same area here, it's a contradiction of terms. We have should be left to women and servants, and then all of a sudden we're honoring. We approach the Sabbath as which we'd be honoring our bride.
Yes.
It's a terrible contradiction in terms.
Royalty would still be part of that stratified society, right?
But aren't these terms like the Queen Shabbat or whatever? Aren't they just to convey
They're metaphors.
like the Shekinah is like God welcoming you and being happy, and it's Shabbat. It's not that God is male or female or any of those things. It's just a way so that we can understand.
But it creeps into language. It creeps into language of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we address it? When we do Kabbalat Shabbat, we say Boi Kala,
Bowie.
right? So
Mhm.
Boi being the feminine, and what's the masculine term of a directive imperative to come? Bo. Bo and Bowie. Okay, so in this case he said, Bowie, let us go forth to welcome the Queen Shabbat. So, and then Rabbi Yanai.
Rabbi Yanai, dressed in his finest clothes, on the eve of the Sabbath, and proclaimed, "Come, O bride, come, O bride." Rabbi Bar.
And how would you translate that? Ivrit? It would be, but
Bowie Kala.
come,
The words are right out.
Yeah.
It's right out of
It's where the
Lakota.
songs.
Bowie Kala, Bowie Kala.
And that's actually when we turn to face the east, the entrance.
We face the entrance.
Right.
Face the entrance, not necessarily.
Happens not to be because we.
Well, we tend to face east because that's the entrance is that way, but yeah.
She caught me that.
Who's Jerusalem?
Well, but it's
That's
just
not-
like,
that's not what we're doing.
okay, one person at a time. Alan's got a comment here.
So I think the tradition of turning on Kabbalat Shabbat is because actually, if you're a mourner, you're not actually supposed to sing that song because it's too joyous.
And
So-
actually, they stay outside until we do
They stay
Hatzi
outside.
Kaddish. So normally, if somebody is actually mourning, they would not be part of our service until after that.
However, members
Huh.
of the congregation, I'm sorry,
Oh, sorry. They come in and that part of the
they
Yeah.
can't come in right there. So I mean that's one tradition. So that the congregation specifically turns the door to say, okay, we're done singing Kabbalat Shabbat. Now we're not only welcoming the Sabbath, but we're also welcoming those members of the congregation who were left outside. So that's one interpretation of it.
Nice,
So you turn to the door
nice.
for them.
Well, usually because we're getting up to like Hatzi Kaddish, and they would come in
And
to
they
do
would come in,
Hatzi
they would come
Kaddish.
in 2 seconds, yeah.
And another thing in addition to that is that the temple is supposed to be built there. So you're facing the temple because the prayer is like supposed to be like the temple service. So you're facing the temple if you're in the temple. That's what I've read.
Well, that would be like probably where the ark was normally, because that would be east, right? So if the temple were rebuilt, it would be arguably east.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what I read when the thing that I read about the
Okay.
explanation of that.
Except for
All the prayers that
and
are
stuff.
mirrors, those things that happen in the temple.
Okay,
In
so
California,
Rabba
it'd be
bar
pretty
Rav
much
Huna,
Rabba bar Rav Huna dropped in on Rabba bar Rav Naaman. They served him 3 seahs of greased wafers. How did you know I was coming? He asked. They replied, are you more important to us than she is?
okay, so what does that mean? Look at the footnote. She,
Sabbath. She is the Sabbath, in honor of whom, rather than Rabbah, the delicacy had been prepared.
okay, so, yeah, Rav Huna comes in and he gets these like great wafers and he's saying, how did you know I was coming? He's like, well, really I didn't, but I was doing this in honor of Shabbat. What a great thing the company came to on top of it. So, Rabbi Abba?
Rabbi Abba bought meat from 13 butchers for 13 silver coins. He handed it to his servants on the threshold and said to them, hurry, hurry. Rabbi Bahu sat on an ivory chair to blow the fire. Rav Anna wore a udna,
And let's see what that is.
garment worn on special occasion.
Okay.
For it was taught in the school of Rabbi Ishmael, do not wear the garments in which you boiled the pot for your master when you serve him wine.
So in other words, on Shabbat, you're going to wear something more special than your regular workday clothes, arguably. And then we have Rav Safa that singed a sheep's head, Rava salted the fish, and Rav Huda giggled the lambs. Are we going to pick up Rav Papa?
Rav Papa prepared bricks. Rav Krishna chopped beef. Rabbi
Beet.
Beet. Rabbi and Rav Yosef gathered wood. Rav Zera set the kindling alight. It's interesting that they're pointing out all the rabbis have their work to do. And these actually, some of these, like beet is especially interesting because it's really hard to chop beet.
It is.
It's one of the
That is
hardest
true.
foods to prepare.
And on top of it, I'm sure they didn't have like, the easiest of knives to like sort of cut, and then you've got like beet juice that's like staining things and whatever, but anyway.
That's when it originally ran into the horseradish you put on the cooked fish.
We made an earlier point that in those times you generally had servants to do the hard work except for the work of Shabbat,
Where it's a privilege and an honor.
Even all these rabbis who are like the rabbis in the Talmud, they dive in and do all this hard work. Rabbi Zera set the kindling alight. Rav Nachman bar Isaac carried burdens in and out on his shoulder. He said, if Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were to visit me, would I not carry burdens for them? Some say Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi carried burdens in and out on their shoulders. They said, if Rabbi Yochanan were to visit us, would we not carry burdens for him? Joseph is, and I guess that refers to something, the hierarchy of these rabbis.
Essentially, yeah. So, and really, one endeavors to be the most humble instead of the most flourishing, because those who are the most, out there with, I'm so-and-so, are really put down, because it's not one of our midot. I mean, it's not one of the ones that we really, we really strive for this midah of humility.
Yosef the Sabbath honorer had a heathen neighbor who owned much property. That the Chaldean astrologers said to the neighbor, Yosef the Sabbath honorer will enjoy it all. The neighbor therefore sold all his property, bought a jewel with the proceeds, and put it in his turban. When he crossed
And
on,
so basically the issue is this Chaldean somehow was really upset with his neighbor. Okay, that's the background to this. However, the Chaldean, as he was,
okay, so he bought this one jewel, put it in his turban, and was coming all as well. As he crossed on the ferry, the wind blew it off and deposited it in the water, where a fish swallowed it. Later, I've heard this story.
yeah,
They caught the fish, brought it to the market on the eve of Sabbath, and offered it for sale. Who will buy it now? They asked. people said, take it to Joseph the Sabbath owner, he always buys. They brought him the fish and he purchased it. When he opened it, he found the jewel inside and sold it for 13 gold pieces.
Okay, so, and 13, some understand this as
13 attributes.
13 lofts full of gold, but that seems exaggerated. It seems that Joseph did not know the provenance of the jewels. So, at any rate, whatever, he got great wealth.
Wow.
But why? Why did he get great wealth?
Because he followed the Sabbath.
Because he followed the Sabbath, because he was buying this fish, because he didn't honor Shabbat, and often fish were the thing that were eaten. And they knew that he was a Sabbath honorer.
You knew he had to have something good because he was a Sabbath honorer.
That's right, that's it. So he probably had small boats to put that without an issue with Borer, but I digress.
They wouldn't have been there.
He would have just magically disappeared. So go ahead.
An old man met him and commented, who borrows for the Sabbath? The Sabbath repays him.
Okay, so there's lots of stories because we live in such an affluent society. It's very difficult for us to like get into the constructs of like what can you use as a wick? Because you're like, people were using their leftover clothes or their leftover whatever rag kind of thing that might have been used for a horse or might have been used for whatever cattle or that kind of thing. So whoever is borrowing for the Sabbath, can you make kiddush when you've just got beer? Can you make it if you just have bread? What's the priority? Should you buy candles or should you buy wine? If you only have one, what do you
Candles.
Wine.
Candles.
do?
Well, if enough wine, you can see the light. I want. But
Maybe there's that.
But there's also a story out where the only thing that you're allowed to steal if you don't have enough money is a candle for Shabbat.
A small and minor holocaust. At any rate.
I have a story I read every Passover for my children when they were little, called The Magician. And in the story, the magician comes into town dressed in rags, so he's a poor man, but he comes to a house and says, I want to have Shabbat with you, just right in here. But they have nothing. There's an old man, they have nothing. He says, it's okay, I have a little magic and I'll use my magic. So first, he did, abracadabra, and there appeared candlesticks on the table, and then he did another trick, and there appeared the wine, and then the fish. And
you know what the abracadabra, I know I'm digressing again,
I
sorry.
don't know if it was.
You know what abracadabra actually is?
No.
It's Hebrew.
Okay.
Yeah.
It originated.
Yeah, abracadabra.
And it's been used ever since.
Right. The musician.
Magician.
Doesn't it mean and he creates or?
No, adabra, like davar, I speak as the thing, or like the thing, or creating the thing. Oh, sorry, you know what? I did this incorrectly. You're right. You are correct.
Well, that's why it's been used throughout the ages and then it got adulterated in the medieval time frame to actually be ceremonial magicians. Who weren't parlor trick magicians. There's a difference. There's magic, M-A-G-I-C, and magic, M-A-G-I-C-K.
So you're right. And it's kind of we have these like little extra. But bara is to create, and davar is a thing, or also speech. So I speak as I create, or I create as I speak. But anyway, so yeah.
And bara is the first
Bara.
word in Reshit, in the beginning.
Okay.
So, anyway, it's a very
You're not allowed
nice
to
story.
look to the right of.
Sorry, please, go ahead. Yeah, but still, so he created all of this stuff ready for Shabbat.
Yes. Well, and then the old man and the old woman were frightened, so they ran away from the house, and they went to talk to Grandma. We had the magician come to our house, and we made this for Shabbat, and we made that for Shabbat. What should we do? What should we do? We're afraid. He goes, oh no, go back. It must be good. It's going to be good. So they went back, and the magician was gone, but they had a beautiful Sabbath table set. So they sat down and then they realized that it was Elijah the prophet.
Lovely.
You've heard the story.
No, I just know it's always Elijah.
Because he's the one that will come and visit in disguise, and you won't know who he is, and it's always generally beneficial.
Although sometimes teaching moments is opposed to beneficial,
Right.
depending on his methods and motives. So, yeah.
And the
So,
respondents'
that's
methods
lovely.
and
Thank
motives.
My favorite
Thank you for
created
the,
alcoholic.
got it. Who's up for reading next?
The rabbi asked,
So, Raya will have her official name.
Rabbi asked Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, what special merit do the wealthy of the land of Israel possess? He replied, it is because they tithe, and as it is said, you shall set aside tithe, Deuteronomy. Tithe and you will become wealthy. What special method do the wealthy?
Well, wait, before you go,
Oh, you
let's
want
look at
42,
why that
okay.
is and how we get from one to the other. That's the footnote.
There is a play here on words, Aser, tithe, and Asher, wealthy.
Yeah.
What special merit do the wealthy of Babylonia possess? Seeing that they do not tithe, he replied, they honor the Torah. And those of other lands, they honor the Sabbath, as Rabbi Chia Bar Abba related. I was once invited to a home of gentlemen in Laodicea, and they set before him a golden table that needed 10 men to carry it. 16 silver chains with fixed on it, and dishes and cups and jugs, and all kinds of choice foods and spices were set out. As they served, they said, the earth is the Lord's, and all that it holds, etc. Psalms. And they cleared away, and they said, the heavens belong to the Lord, but the earth he gave over to man. I asked him, my son, what did you do to deserve this? And he replied, I was a butcher, and whenever I came across a beast of good quality, I said, let this be for Shabbat. And I said, happy are you, and blessed be the present who has granted what you deserve. Caesar said to Rabbi Joseph ben
Hadidia, yeah.
Give it that.
Thank you. How is it that the
That comes after you get wet and you're trying to breathe. And you remember that for the rest of your life.
I made sure to get that in the microphone good too.
Let's see, he said, where am I?
How is it that the
How is it
Sabbath
that the
is?
Sabbath meal smells so appealing? And he said, we have a certain spice called Shabbat, and that we put in it, and let me have some, he requested. And Joshua replied, for those who observe Shabbat, it works, and for those who don't, it doesn't.
Okay, and the play down there on words again, 54.
The Hebrew for bill is Shabbat, spelled exactly the same as Shabbat. Joshua, or perhaps a storyteller, is playing on the word.
Okay, so we had the previous word of aser, tithe, or ashir, wealthy, and then another one, shevet and Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
So our word sniffing comes rightly from the Talmudic times. Go ahead.
And is that the Exilog?
Exilorg.
Exilorg.
The Exilorg was the one who became the person in Babylonia as the liaison to Babylonian government.
The Exilog asked Rab
Hamnuna.
what is the meaning of if you call the Lord's holy day honored? He said, this refers to the Day of Atonement, when there is no eating or drinking. The Torah says, honor it by wearing fresh clothes. Mm-hmm. And if you honor it, Rab says, by starting it early, Shemuel says, by extending it late. Papa Bar Abba's sons asked him,
So do we do that?
yes, we do.
How so?
Well, we are,
It's 26 hours, so 24. If you start at kind of an hour early and continue an hour.
70 minutes after, yeah, for Havdalah.
Okay, Rav Papa Bar Abba's
sons
sons.
asked him, what do people like us who have meat and wine every day do differently to honor Shabbat? And he said, if you normally eat early, eat later. And if you normally eat late, eat earlier.
So in other words, what's he saying here?
Make it unique.
Right, do it differently.
Yeah.
Which reminds me very much of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz's little picture video that I saw once upon a time where a guy said, Rabbi, I eat bacon on Shabbat. He goes, oh, that's one way to celebrate it. I would celebrate it. And he's being very,
Because it's on Shabbat.
Is that Hillel? Was that Hillel?
that was Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz.
Oh, right. That contemporary. That would be like a Hillel argument.
Yes,
Well, there's that idea that I've read that basically says, like in the right context, if the intention is right, anything's permissible.
yes, although not from a halakhic standpoint.
There aren't many circumstances that would make it acceptable, correct?
It depends, I mean, it depends on what we're talking about.
If you are in such a place, and like if Moses was eating bacon, you wouldn't go up and say you can't eat bacon. Obviously, for whatever Moses is at, that's what I'm talking about on a deeper level. Of course, for me, for anyone else, obviously that, you know what I mean? I'm saying it's on a much deeper plane, and that's how this was written, how its context came about.
And perhaps why, our job isn't really to judge other people and how they choose to come across.
That's the quickest way to get smacked against the pavement.
we,
It really is.
we definitely try to avoid that, don't we?
Yes, in some cases, unless you're in certain places in Israel or certain parts of Boyle Heights.
Where you do it.
Because you have to follow the halakha, because everybody is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah,
And if you don't, you're judged severely.
true. Depends upon one's community. But, there's a thread of an argument, but almost any argument, we can take the flip side of it, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of whatever, Judah's gonna argue on one side, I can probably argue just as equally well how important it is to, hold the
Because
complete
truth
opposite,
is
right?
always in the paradigm.
Well, it's
The truth
always,
is always in the paradigm.
They're both, because
And I think
these are
it's-
the words
I
of the
think
living
it's
God,
set up
right?
that way so that I can't be right over you and you can't be right over me. I think it's that way on purpose. So it's like, get over yourself. I'm gonna get over myself. You know what I'm saying in general terms.
Now, wait a minute, there are places that people can be right over you.
Yeah,
And get away with it, and you're gonna say yes and thank you.
that's
yeah,
true.
yeah, the thank you is gonna be a big
Because
step.
whatever authority is in your life comes from God anyway. So,
I think it is that there's always extenuating circumstances. There's always those times when it doesn't fit the mold. And it's like
always-
giving an out, because it's like when we discussed the dirt.
It's always divine providence. It's not up to you or me or anyone else. So whoever you meet, whatever situation you come up against, it's meant to be
Not
that.
necessarily.
I think there's circumstances that
I think
sometimes.
Alexandra has a good point.
It's majority rules. There's that one story in the Talmud where I can't remember what it was, but it was the rabbis
The
were
oven
arguing.
off,
Yeah,
right.
were arguing about the kosher of the oven, and one of them said that no, it's not kosher. The other one said yes, it is. And then I can't remember which one was arguing, but the one that said, well, if I'm right, let
The carrot tree.
yeah, let the
Yeah, and
carrot tree
everything was
fall,
showing that he
the-
was right.
The
They
lightning and
wouldn't-
the earth shattering, and everything happened, and they still voted him out.
Right.
And then something gruesome happened.
They
to
shamed him.
Didn't they?
Yeah, I
didn't
think
they
he
end up
wound up at
cutting his
sea.
head off, or- No, something awful happened. He ended up.
They isolated him. They cast him
Yeah, he
out.
was cast him out.
And, but then there was such sorrow that they wound up having to bring him back, didn't they? He somehow came back.
Sounds
Divine
like
providence. It all happened
Well,
for a reason.
it was majority rules, though. It wasn't. They ignored.
But they were wrong.
What was behind that majority?
Okay,
rule?
let's take this argument off the table and put it onto the board here.
How much
Let's take this
power do you
argument,
associate for
let's
yourself?
take this argument off
You
the
don't have
table.
to argue about it. I know
Okay,
it
good,
doesn't matter.
so let's take the argument off the table and put it on the board, right?
Okay, we'll get visuals are good.
So,
Especially when you're recording.
Well,
majority rule is a concept, as well as hashgacha prati.
and in this case, the majority might not have been right with Alexa's story.
Well, I don't associate that much power to human beings. I
There-
believe it's all divine providence. It's not right or wrong, it's just what I believe. And it's based on things that I've read. I didn't just pull it out of the air.
Okay, so majority rule is one way of looking at our constructs and at our life situation and scenario. Hashgacha pratit, which is the Hebrew word like there is an overseer in the details, is yet another way of looking at our situation. It's not exactly the same, but then we have Rabbi Budman Pashishka who says, we should all keep in our pockets. On the one hand, the world was created for me, and in the other pocket, I have nothing but dust and ash, right? So we should have both of those in our pockets at all times. The real opportunity is figuring out when we should pull out one and when we should pull out the other, right? We have to walk a balance. between majority rule, hashgacha pratit, and what is our learning from all of this. So thank you all for today. We'll pick up there next week. It's wonderful.
You're welcome.
It did go quickly. Oh, we didn't do our, some kind of like after bracha.